Okay, and we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tea Time Talks. And happy Easter, of course, for all of you who are celebrating the holiday for today. As you can see, I'm joined by one of the main faces and voices of La Liga TV, Simon Hanley. Simon, how are you?
I'm doing fine, Semra. How are you? It's good to see you. Good to hear you again. We're surviving. We're going a bit stir crazy at times, but pulling through.
That I can certainly share that sentiment of wanting to run outside. Sometimes, obviously, it's been a little bit difficult. But what have you been doing to stay sane and to stay safe indoors? What have you been getting up to?
Very little, I suppose, the same as everybody. Hours and hours on internet, especially YouTube, watching loads of old movies. I've been reading a lot, I have to say. Trying to entertain my son who's in lockdown with me. That I can say has been really good fun.
And what have you guys been doing? How have you been keeping him entertained?
A couple of board games,
All right, nice.
which is a nice way to pass the time, spending quite a bit of time cooking.
All right.
I enjoy cooking and been trying to improvise around the situation. But like I said, been watching lots of old movies. Been catching up on Alfred Hitchcock and Billy Wilde.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, those are two of the greatest in the industry.
Absolutely.
And I see you have a very nice setup behind you, lots of books there.
Yeah,
and a nice Beach Boys poster. I imagine somewhere there's a Newcastle United related photo behind you
not
as well.
not in this room, no, not in the study,
Okay.
but elsewhere in the house. Yeah, there's a signed picture of Malcolm McDonald.
Oh, very nice.
Who's he? You're thinking, aren't you? Only the
No, of
only the
course
greatest
not. Of
English
course
centre
not.
forward of the last century.
So, why don't we talk a little bit about Newcastle? Obviously, you were brought up in England, you're from there originally. Football is very much a religion in the UK.
Yeah.
So, it's only a matter of time that you eventually, everybody finds some affinity to the game.
Sure.
But how did you specifically get into it? When did you fall in love with the game? What attracted you to it?
I mean, I can't really remember a specific moment because you just played football in the street. That was all you did, really, from when I can remember. And break times at school, we used to play with a stone. If you didn't have a ball,
Really?
you'd kick a stone around. Yeah.
Well, I imagine that wouldn't be very, very fun.
It wasn't, my mum used to get a bit annoyed about the wear and tear on the shoes, but that's what we used to do. You'd play with anything that was around. It was my granddad, really, who was really into football. He was the captain of a team called Wisbech Town back in the 30s. Wisbech Town became Peterborough United. So my first real football influence was my granddad. He took me to London Road to see Peterborough, who were then playing in the 4th Division. And that was really the key. He used to insist that I use my left foot, which it was always a bit problematic. In fact, he invented this thing, the training tool, which was my gran used to work in a plastics factory.
Okay.
And one of the things they produced were really cheap, nasty plastic footballs. My granddad invented this thing where you had a stick in your hand and a spring on the end that was connected to the ball. And you had to kick it with the right foot, then the left foot, then the right foot, then the left foot. He made the huge mistake of talking about this to some stranger he met in a pub one night.
I was going to say, I'm fairly certain I've seen a more modern version of this somewhere along the line.
Imagine my surprise when a few months later, watching a famous 1970s children's show in the UK called Magpie, there was some guy on presenting this training tool as if it was his idea. My granddad, once again, in his cups perhaps, lost the possibility of becoming a millionaire with that one.
Oh man, and how did he react to that when he saw that?
Well, I think he was used to living the hard life. I don't think it was a big deal for him. The big deal for him was to make sure that I would, be equally good with the left foot as I was with the right. And unfortunately for him, it never happened.
So I want to get into Newcastle
Yeah.
in a minute, but first I would love to acknowledge some of the people we have watching and with us right now. Fabul1129, who's been with us religiously every single one of these chats. Thank you very much as always.
Hi there,
He
Fabul.
says hola to both of us.
Hola, Fabul.
And happy Easter. And we have Nimalin316 who says he loves your commentary.
Oh, thank you very much.
We're off to a fine start. And of course, remember, you guys can always throw in your questions or anything you want to ask us about at any point in time throughout the chat. We are here for you as well. So to go back to what we were saying, Newcastle, when did your love affair with that club, when did that happen? And how did it happen? What are some of your first memories of being one of, the biggest fans of the club out there? No question.
Well, I don't know, there's quite a lot of them actually. I know
that at least.
I was born and brought up in a place called Morpeth, which is about 15 miles north of Newcastle. So they were obviously the big team. I was born in the early 60s. So by the end of the 60s, there was a fairly decent Newcastle side under a manager who's kind of been forgotten, a guy called Joe Harvey. Joe Harvey was a Yorkshireman who played for Newcastle in the 50s. And in fact, Newcastle in the 50s won the FA Cup 3 times and were known as the Cup team. And under Joe Harvey, they had an absolutely fantastic side. I'm talking about when I was, a little kid at junior school. But they made a signing of this Londoner, this guy who I mentioned earlier called Malcolm McDonald. Perhaps if I just refer to him as Super Mac, people know who I'm talking about. And he was a big, robust, old-fashioned, traditional centre forward who was absolutely fantastic to watch. And he played in this really good team. He had a guy playing alongside him called John Tudor, who was a magnificent goal scorer in his own right, the kind of secondary goal scorer who'd pick up almost 20 goals a season by himself. They had a really attacking side, great midfielder called Terry Hibbett, a magnificent Scottish midfielder called Tony Green, who tragically only played for about 30 matches for Newcastle before getting his cruciate done. And of course, back in those days, there was no coming back from that. So I had to retire. I remember very vividly a fantastic Scottish, talented right-sided midfielder called Jinky Jimmy Smith.
What a great name, by the way, too.
Yeah, he was fantastic. You should ask Graham Hunter about him. He's a big fan of Jinky as well. And he used to play with his shirt untucked, and that really got to me as a kid. So I remember always for the school team and for a little local side we had as well, insisting on playing with the shirt untucked. And I had a teacher at school who every half time would very deliberately tuck my shirt in. I was edgy, pulling the shorts up. You've got to play with your shirt tucked in. A couple of minutes after going back to the for the second half,
out it comes again.
And it was just a fantastic team. They were never kind of going to win the league, although for a couple of seasons they were up in the top 5. But they did really well in the cup. And the first really heartbreaking moment I had as a Newcastle fan, and believe me, over the years there have been many of those, was going to Wembley to see them play in the cup final against Liverpool in 73 or 74. And we got absolutely hammered. 3-0 we lost. It was Kevin Keegan playing for Liverpool, and he scored a couple of goals. Later, of course, he became a huge hero to Newcastle fans, but back then he was kind of hated. But one of the first games I remember at St James's Park was a reserve game, and it was Newcastle against Liverpool. And in those days, the reserve league in England was really powerful. It was really strong, and players who were perhaps coming back from injury would play for the reserves. And I do remember a guy called Steve Highway, who was a huge player for Liverpool back in the 70s, lining up for Liverpool reserves on that occasion. And also John Toshak was playing for them. So that was one of the first games. And also another one that I went to with my dad was, in fact, Malcolm McDonald's home debut against.
Okay. Oh, amazing. Great.
And as a kind of boy's own hero, he, of course, scored a hat-trick. And so had to get carried off on a stretcher, injured, after scoring his third goal. And Newcastle actually beat Liverpool 3-2. Don't beat Liverpool too often, really. So that was quite a memory as well.
So just to carry on with more wonderful memories, obviously growing up and being able to go to games at St James Park, which was probably one of the best grounds, certainly one of the most historic grounds in all of English football. I mean, it's tremendous.
Just to interrupt.
Oh, yeah, sure.
If you'll pardon my French, it was a shithole in the 70s. It was
it?
Absolutely terrible, yeah. There was a grandstand for about 5,000 people, and you get 55,000 standing on the other three sides of the pitch. Only one of those terraces was covered. That was the famous Leazer's End, where, you know, you had to tread pretty carefully if you went in there. Basically, a lot of the memories, I mean, everybody has that memory of the first time they go to climbing up the concrete steps into the ground, and that amazing sight of the green when you get there, it's kind of flashing in front of your eyes. But my memories tend to be smells, unfortunately. You know, it was...
Smells? What, like smells of the grass or smells of, the fans?
Smells of the fans, I think, is one way.
Oh, right.
There were very limited bathrooms in English football grounds back in the 70s. A lot of people would have spent a good couple of hours in the pub beforehand. It wasn't always easy for fans to find a decent place to relieve themselves. So it was pretty unpleasant. There was also the smell of Bovril. For some reason, people would drink Bovril at the time. I can see you're looking confused. It's a kind of,
I don't know what that is, I have to say. It must be an English thing.
Yeah, it's pretty, I'm not going to recommend it to you. It's a kind of meat extract hot drink. Absolutely disgusting.
Sounds terrible. It sounds really terrible.
Everybody was smoking all the time. So, 60,000 people smoking, half drunk, drinking Bovril. The language was a real ear and eye opener for a young kid, but they were fantastic times. No.
Oh man, yeah, those were the days, weren't they? You paint quite a picture.
I mean,
unbelievable.
They were scary times as well. There was, the hooligan element was really quite fierce and quite scary. There were a bunch of guys at Newcastle who used to wear doctors' lab coats with razor blades sewn into.
Oh my God.
I mean, there were some scary characters there, but incredible atmosphere, I have to say. When you hear the Geordie fans singing the blatant races, it really does get your hair stand up. It's a fantastic atmosphere there.
And incredible players as well that came through too. I mean, let's not forget, you already mentioned Kevin Keegan, obviously came as a player, later as a manager. Gaza. I mean, God, who else am I'm forgetting somebody else, another big one. Obviously, Peter Beardsley, of course, Peter Beardsley. So that lends me to another question for you. This one actually from Fabul again. He wants to know what your favourite Newcastle player and manager are, or who they were and why.
Okay, favourite managers. I mean, there've been a few. I mentioned Joe Harvey earlier, who doesn't really get the credit he deserves, I think. He was the manager of the last Newcastle side to actually lift a trophy, apart from the second division championship, which we've won a couple of times in.
Is this the Intertoto?
A little bit more important than that, Semra Hunter.
Okay, I'm trying to recall some memory of trophies.
Toto they won without actually playing the final, because there were 3 champions in those days, and they didn't actually have to play a final to win it. I don't know how they won it, mathematically, I think. No, we won what used to be called the Fairs Cup in 1969. And beating Upchess Dosa 6-2, I think, over 2 legs. That's the last major trophy they won. It became the UEFA Cup, before known as the Fairs Cup. And we were one of the first English teams to win a European trophy. And that was when I was like about 8 or 9 years old. So you had the feeling, this is I should get used to this. We're going to be winning loads of trophies.
We'll be filling up our glass cabinet in no time.
Haven't won anything since, so I'm still waiting.
Well, that brings me to another question here, a little bit of banter. I imagine you're not going to like this question very much. From Neil Kirkin, says, ask Simon if he minded living in the shadow of the mighty Middlesbrough.
Traditionally there's massive rivalry between the teams in the northeast of England.
Right.
Newcastle.
Because Middlesbrough's quite close, right?
It is,
to Newcastle?
Yeah. It's Newcastle, Sunderland, and Middlesbrough. There are others too, but they're the big three.
But would you say the biggest rivalry is with Sunderland over Middlesbrough?
With Sunderland, yeah. I'm sorry, Neil, but Middlesbrough kind of don't even really count. But traditionally, you're supposed to hate those other teams and supporters of those other teams. I never felt like that. I always wanted all three of those clubs to be in the first division, really.
Right.
Quite happy to see Sunderland. I was delighted to see Sunderland win the FA Cup in the early 70s. They famously beat Leeds United at Wembley, and for me that was a big deal. If Newcastle couldn't win it, I was happy for another northeast team to win it. Really, the same with Middlesbrough. They haven't had too much success over the years, but a huge club, great fans. They've had some fantastic periods over the last few decades. I'd love to see all three in the top flight in the Premier League, no question.
Well, adding to that banter, Neil says the last team to win a cup in the Northeast. I'm assuming he's referring to Middlesbrough, which would be his team. But anyway, speaking of Sunderland, have you seen the Netflix? Is it Netflix or is it?
Yeah, it's Netflix.
I think it's Netflix. The Sunderland Till I Die. Have you seen it?
It's fantastic. It really is fantastic. Yeah, they're. It's almost like the story of how not to run a football club. Because they are a big club, a huge club, but historically absolutely massive. From the very beginnings of English football, they've always been huge. And the sooner they get back, the better. I'm sure a lot of Newcastle fans will be saying, "What's he talking about?" But no,
they're the enemy. You can't speak so kindly about them.
It's a sport, isn't it? And we love the game. And I really miss the derbies between Newcastle and Sunderland. I know, obviously, good friend of ours and colleague, Gus Poyet, he was a brilliant manager for Sunderland. And he famously says that when he took the job on, they said, "You've got to keep us up. We don't care if we finish, in 1 point or on goal difference above relegation, but keep us up and beat Newcastle." And he always beat Newcastle with Sunderland. They always beat us. So, for me, one of the biggest games you can see in English football is Newcastle against Sunderland. And obviously there's the kind of the fan element with the massive rivalry that sometimes turns a little bit nasty. But it's a brilliant match and it's a brilliant occasion. And hopefully Sunderland in a couple of years will be able to get promoted 2 or 3 times, return to the Premier League, and we can have those derbies again.
Well, it certainly would be brilliant to see. But
just to interrupt a second, when the prior question about managers of Newcastle, I mentioned Joe Harvey. You'd have to mention Kevin Keegan. You'd have to mention Sir Bobby Robson as well, who was absolutely brilliant and is much missed. And we all still remember Bobby Robson and how great he was for the club.
And someone we didn't mention as well, Alan Shearer. He's another legend, a more modern, more recent legend, but obviously brilliant as well. Did you ever get to see him play live at St. James Park as well, or were you already living in Spain?
I was already living in Spain by that time, and he was obviously absolutely brilliant. One of the great things, I think, and why he's still, much admired, is that he could easily have gone to Manchester United with Alex Ferguson, but insisted on returning to his hometown, to Newcastle, where he was brilliant for us. I think the thing about Shearer is he's got a very dry personality. There's that famous story about how when he won the Premier League with Blackburn, he celebrated the next day by creosoting his garden fence. So he was always, he wasn't the most lovable of characters, but a fantastic goal scorer, no question.
Oh, yeah.
And really committed to the Newcastle cause, yeah.
All right, well, why don't we go on and move ahead, fast forward some years, and we can talk about La Liga. And specifically, I believe it was the summer of 2017 that there was the idea of putting together a brand new channel, one in which we now know and love, called La Liga TV.
Yep.
And you were the person that was tasked with putting together a content and editorial team.
Yeah.
At the time, right? I believe it was around that time, that summer or something like that. But anyway, walk me through like the initial phase of how you got the channel up and running and got it off the ground. Back at that time.
Well, I have to first of all give a big shout out to the two people who were really involved with me in setting it up, which is the producer Leticia Pasamontes, great friend, great person, great producer, and Amy Von Adams as well, who
is still with us on the channel, which is great.
Yeah. And the three of us really were kind of thrown in at the deep end and told, okay, we're creating this channel, La Liga TV. We had 2 live programs a week over the whole season. We did a La Liga preview every Friday and a La Liga review every Monday. We were, I think, as you can tell, very creative in naming shows. And it was basically me, Graham Hunter, Duncan McMath, and the guests we had. Fewer guests than we do now. The big guy that first season for us was Luis Garcia, who was absolutely brilliant. Lauren was a regular guest. Steve Archibald, who will be returning to La Liga TV as a pundit when we eventually get back up and running. And it was really limited to us, The great thing about the boss at Media Pro was he said, you can do whatever you want. So we had kind of total freedom within the guidelines of you have to do a preview and a review show every week. And I mean, we kind of learned as we went along. It was great for me because it was the first time I'd done TV in English. I'd been doing TV in Spanish before that.
And you're in a great little, I don't remember what it was, like El Rincón de Simon or something, or was it Simon's Corner? Or, I can't remember the name of it. But on Gold TV, you had a great little section, didn't you? Which was quite good fun.
Yeah, that was the thing called Simon's Life, which was
That's
fun.
what it was.
Yeah, a lot of really creative people who helped me to do that. That was great fun. But my main TV experience was on a show with Axel Torres on beIN Sports, which was a nightly kind of talk show about all things football called El Club, where I was really privileged to be able to spend time collaborating with Jorge Valdano, Andoni Zubizarreta, Tony Padilla, who of course is one of our fantastic colleagues now. And that became quite a regular thing because that was the 2015-16 season that Leicester won the Premier League.
Right.
And so because there was so much interest in that, I was a regular collaborator, kind of constantly arguing with Valdano. I was saying Leicester are going to win the Premier League. And they were all laughing at me and saying, no, that's impossible. It was also the season when Klopp started at Liverpool, unless I'm getting the seasons mixed up.
I think it was about that time. It's been about 3 or 4 seasons now, for sure.
The final of the UEFA Cup where they lost to Sevilla. So there was a lot of call for me. I was covering the UEFA Cup as well on a program with Tony Padilla, presented by Danai Boranat. And so all of my experience really had been in Spanish on TV, also as a co-commentator of Premier League games. I had the tremendous privilege that season to actually commentate the Sunderland game that relegated Newcastle United to the...
Oh, no.
So, you had to really be professional and hide your emotions. But that was great. I started off commentating the Argentinian league
Okay.
for Gold TV 10 or 12 years ago. Before that, I'd been working at Barca TV, commentating games for them in English. The biggest game I did there was probably Messi's debut in the Gamper against Capella's Juventus.
Oh, amazing.
Amazing game to
That was a really good game, yeah.
in situ.
Remember that.
Which of course has become a kind of iconic match now, you know. So that was my first experience. And then I combined talking about the Premier League in Spanish and covering La Liga in English. I remember one season, Graham Hunter and myself every Sunday did a multi-goal where we'd commentate 4 or 5 games simultaneously for the whole season. And knowing me and knowing Graham, I'm sure you can imagine how chaotic that was.
But fun, yeah, of course, and very entertaining. I can only imagine.
Sure. And then La Liga TV, as you said, we started off with that very limited production the first season. But then by the second season, as you know, because that's when you came on board, it was 24/7 with programming every day. And I think we haven't looked back. I'm massively proud of what we've all achieved. And I think we're a fantastic team. And I'm sure, you know, people out there who regularly watch us will agree that it's a really serious project and that we cover La Liga in depth. And
I'm just going to interrupt you for a second because Steve Archibald actually just joined the chat. Hi, so hello, Steve. We were just talking about you. We want you back with us as a pundit. So you need to pay attention to what we're saying. And we'll see you very soon, obviously, as soon as all of this coronavirus situation gets better.
Hope you're keeping safe. Here's to you, mate. Here's mud in your eyes.
Some healthy tomato juice.
With a little extra added too.
Oh, well, there you go. It is Sunday after all, Sunday afternoon, why not? Help at the time. But anyway, hope you're doing well, Steve. Thanks for being with us. Sorry, so to go back to what you were saying, I mean, it's incredible. It's only been 2 seasons, and we haven't even finished, really, this season. Yeah, obviously. But the just how much we've blossomed as a team and as a channel. We go out, 185 countries now, all over the world. The UK in particular is a market of interest for us. It's just amazing how much we have grown and the top quality of pundits and ex-pros and everybody that we have brought into the side and how they've all elevated our game as well. I mean, what do you think is going to be the way forward? What's next season going to be throwing our way?
It's such an open question right now. It's so difficult to say, Semra. I mean, everybody's so keen to see the football coming back. It's going to be weird. There are these stories. You and I were chatting just before we began this broadcast, if you like, about the news that Real Sociedad have said they want to go back to training on Tuesday. I think, from what I can gather, this won't be permitted.
Right.
Because...
Well, I think legally they're not allowed to do it.
Yeah, still in the state of emergency. Now, there have been rumours that, and I think there's still rumours, I'm by no means an expert on this, that some non-essential industry will be able to resume come Tuesday. But I also understand from what I've read from what the Federation have put out there, the Spanish Federation, is that, you know, teams can't get back to training. Now, Real Sociedad have said that Zubieta will be open and players can train, but as individuals, not in a group.
Right. Exactly.
They won't be obliged to go there because all players are obliged to continue training, but at home.
Right.
So I think that's not going to happen. Certainly for the Madrid teams, it would seem to be very unfair because as Madrid is one of the main focal points of the virus in Spain, that would be unthinkable for them to return to training.
And also really unfair for any of the other teams across the league in general. It could give them a slight advantage, even though they're not training as a group. but they are still having access to world-class
Yeah.
facilities outside of their homes. So, I mean, it wouldn't exactly be the right choice to allow them to do it if you're not, either you allow it for everybody or you don't allow it for anybody, I would think.
It's a really tough one. And I mean, the return to competitive football is going to be really tough.
Absolutely.
We've heard from Jaume Roures, the man whose company MediaPro own the rights to televise La Liga, that this season has to finish. That if this season doesn't finish, they can't even consider starting next season. So that would mean a really compressed schedule of matches, but without having, if you like, a pre-season for players to come back and be expected to play every 3 or 4 days, that brings in a massive risk of injury. The Federation, I noticed today, have been saying a match every 3 or 4 days is unthinkable because you have to have a match. If you have 4 days between a game, then you need 6 between the next one. So it's going to be really tough for them to do. But I imagine we're going to be seeing a lot of football over the summer.
Right.
I imagine we're going to be seeing it on TV and not live in the grounds.
Yeah.
There'll be.
I think probably not even until next year, 2021. We won't see anybody in any grounds anywhere across Europe, quite frankly.
Exactly. But I think, from what I can gather, the intention is to finish this season. And, obviously it would be a massive shame if this season, for some reason, couldn't be finished. Here in Spain, it seems the famous curve is slowly being flattened. But I think the lockdown is going to last a little bit longer yet.
Well, they're speaking now about extending it for a 4th time into the middle of May.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, and we're not looking at football coming back probably until the earliest sometime, maybe 2nd week in June or midway through June or something like that, in which case it would have to be a relatively compact schedule between European competitions, domestic competitions, and so on. It certainly is interesting to see how it all plays out. But obviously, first and foremost, is going to be the health and safety of everybody involved across the board. So going back to another question about you personally now, actually, Paul Jones wanted to know, since you obviously present and you also commentate, he wanted to know if you had a preference between the two.
It's a great question. No, not really. I enjoy both. I mean, it's a massive privilege to be able to do both. The commentaries are fantastic because you get so into the game. It's a really special way of being able to view the game. I'm privileged to be able to have as co-commentators some of the most amazing pundits. I work a lot with Graham, with Guillaume Balaguer, with Pete Jensen, with Gustavo. I'm not mentioning by any means everybody.
Sure.
but to be able to commentate alongside experts of that caliber is brilliant. It's not the easiest job in the world to do. You lay yourself open to criticism by, one of the things that you get on a regular basis is from the Barca fans, this man's a real Madridista, and from the Madrid fans, he's a culé.
Oh, yeah. I get that all the time, too. I think we all do. It's the nature of the beast, right?
But I mean, I have to insist to everybody, we are totally neutral. Interests us is the football itself. And just in case it hasn't been made absolutely clear, my team's Newcastle United. It's not or Barcelona.
Exactly.
So that aspect of it is absolutely brilliant. I think a lot of people would say, it's kind of a dream job. I get this when I speak to friends. You're so lucky. They don't realise that the hard work that goes into it. But presenting is fascinating as well. The program I present on Wednesdays, Viva La Liga, which is, if you like, a talk show, is spectacular. I mean, that's not work. That's just a pure pleasure to do. You have some of the greatest British journalists who are experts in Spanish football: Pete Jensen, Sid Lowe, Graham, Andy West, and and also guests of the caliber of Chapi Ferrer, Gustavo, Guillaume Balaguer, Andy Orlandi, who I think I consider as a bit of a discovery of ours, and who's going to.
Oh, absolutely.
Already.
We are so lucky to have him as well this season. He's been a brilliant addition to us as well.
Yeah, his knowledge of the game and how lucid he is in getting it across is a joy to listen to and to watch. So that show's brilliant because, obviously we have a lot of freedom in what we talk about. It's really the one show, the one Viva La Liga, which isn't directly linked to either the previous or the next round of matches.
Exactly.
Themes that come up over the season, themes that we're interested in chatting about. I mean, you have a thing called an escaleta in a show, which is step by step. Okay, this is what we talk about here, there, and there. And the escaleta for the Wednesday show is a blank piece of paper.
Right.
We have a few themes prepared, but I start off by asking each of the guests a question. I don't let them know in advance what that question's going to be. And a couple of times we found that the first question has taken us through till practically the end of the show. It's it really is a joy. And then at the weekends, of course, on Saturday and Sunday evenings, I present the roundup show after the final match is completed. That's much more hectic, as you know, because you do that as well at the weekends. You're very much relying on what's just happened. You're in the middle of discussing a goal from. Well,
you're improvising your way through it, really.
Yeah. And suddenly you hear, we've got whoever it may be speaking live to us, and you break off for that. That's fantastic too. So the answer to Paul's question is, I love them both, and I'm massively privileged to have the opportunity to be able to do it.
And if you had to pick one highlight from everything that you've been able to do in this time with the channel, obviously you've been to Seville derbies to commentate from down there, or to Clásicos, or to Madrid derbies as well. Obviously in very fine company of people like Michael Laudrup or Gustavo Poyet, or whoever you like. But what would you say has been the one highlight that stands out above the rest in your experiences with La Liga?
I would say, Semra, that the one highlight was when I was a guest on your show. That was magnificent to be at the other side of the job, as a guest rather than as a presenter. No, but I mean, when we do the games in situ, that's obviously great. I'm not going to say that the Clásico with Michael Laudrup and Graham was a massive highlight, because we got
the weather was horrendous.
Yes, an hour there on the pitch after the game had finished, getting absolutely soaked in almost hurricane level winds. That wasn't the most pleasant, actually. You mentioned the Seville derby. Last season we did that. I think actually one of the most special games we did, again in Seville, we did Betis Sevilla last season, which Betis won. Joaquin comes off the bench in the 87th minute and scores with the only goal of the game with his first touch. That was special. Seeing Getafe beat Sevilla 2-0 was quite special, because it was the first time I think our ears pricked up and we thought, wait a minute, Bordalas is doing something quite special here. Right. We've been proved right last season and this season too.
He's very much the real deal and doing some absolutely spectacular things with what he's got.
Sure. And also in Seville, seeing Sevilla beat Real Madrid quite comfortably last season was...
That's right.
Those are always really spectacular. I say Seville because the people, as you know, are so special down there, and they live football in such a special way that you really get drawn in by the atmosphere and the emotion of those games. But equally so up north, you go to Bilbao or to San Sebastian to see Athletic or Real Sociedad. The derbies between those two were really special games. And also seeing the biggies, either Barca or Madrid or Atletico, playing either in the Reale Arena. I wanted to say Anoeta, but we'll
I know, right? It just kind of rolls off the tongue, Anoeta. But
or in San Mamés. I mean, those are really big events too, and the atmosphere around the stadiums is magnificent. I've deliberately not selected games there in the Metropolitano for Atletico, in the Bernabeu and the Camp Nou. They're obviously brilliant to cover as well. But I mean, La Liga is about so much more than just the big three. I think you'd agree.
Yeah, 100%, for sure. Now, Wes Tucker has actually 2 questions for you, one of which we've already answered, which was about Real Sociedad and the training and the uncertainty of all of it and going back to training in the near future. But the second question is actually a very interesting one. Which 2 teams, I guess, would you want to have promoted, who would you want to have promoted to La Liga, and why, if and when the Segunda Division starts back up again?
Okay, I'm really taking a risk here because if I don't mention somebody, then you run the risk of being crucified by fans of those teams. I'd love Cadiz to get promoted.
I think a lot of people would love to have Cadiz back in the top.
My pension plan is to go and stay in Cadiz for the rest of my days. I think it's a fantastic part of the world.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that about you, actually.
Oh, yes, yeah, and it's not too far away either at my age. But I love that part of the world. The people are amazing. I think the team is absolutely fantastic. It's so exciting. And to have, Cadiz as another Andalusian side in La Liga would be fantastic. So that's answer number 1. Answer number 2 would be the opposite extreme, go up north to A Coruña. I think Deportivo should be a La Liga side. I know they've struggled going up and down like a bit of a yo-yo over the last seasons. When I first came to Spain in the early 90s, or late 80s actually, Deportivo were just starting to show signs of becoming Super Deport. Yeah. It took them a while to actually get to win La Liga, which was still a phenomenal achievement. But the side under Arsenio that didn't quite make it were astonishing. I remember seeing them against Cruyff's Barca in the Camp Nou.
Oh, wow.
That
must have been a tremendous game, actually.
It was. They were defeated 3-0 in the end. But for the first 30 minutes, they had Barca against the ropes. They were just going all at them. They could have quite honestly scored 5 goals in the first half hour. Didn't score them. Koeman scores a free kick, and Barca end up overrunning them and beating them 3-0. But they're a team that should be in La Liga, I think, and a fan base that deserve to be up there too. They've had their problems behind the scenes, as has been well reported over the last few seasons, but they're a great club.
Yeah, no, I agree. And what are you looking the most forward to in the return of football when it does eventually come back? I mean, what are you most looking forward to in that regard? I think
there's, it's such a shame, obviously. The chase for the title is really, really interesting. We've got, in a way, we used to comment, didn't we, last season and the season before, what a shame that we've got La Liga TV up and running, and Barcelona have run La Liga by Easter. Yeah. That wasn't going to be the case this season. So it's really tight at the top, and that's fascinating. I'm really looking forward to seeing whether Getafe can maintain their momentum. I think that's a great story. I'd love to see Getafe play Champions League football. I think it's a progression that we've seen over the last couple of seasons, which is astonishing. And then at the bottom, it's always really tight and thrilling. So looking forward to see how that plays out as well.
Fantastic. And is there anything else, any other topics you want to talk about or mention or discuss, debate?
I think there's no debate about the most important topic, which is for people to stay home and stay safe and to stay patient more than anything. Football will return. It'll be a little bit different than we've got used to, but it will be back. and we just have to keep that in mind. There is light at the end of the tunnel. I think there are so many themes to discuss, and we could go on all afternoon really talking about them. Going outside La Liga a little bit, can Real Madrid fight back and overcome Man City? I think that's going to be really interesting.
Oh, of course. We've got the Champions League as well. There's going to be some really interesting decisions to be made when those eventual second legs are played out.
Exactly. I mean, definitely. I think Atletico squeezed that one in against Liverpool, just in time, really. And that was
and I think they're counting their blessings for that as well.
Yeah, well, that was epic. And I mean, you could say that Atletico are owed something by the Champions League, I think.
Yeah, you could argue that for sure.
Absolutely. And then looking at Barcelona, I mean, again, I don't think we're going to have time to really go into it now, but behind the scenes, they're in real trouble. Bartomeu, the president, has just received, 6 resignations from fellow board members. There's all this scandal about the club paying almost €1 million to a company to manipulate the social media and even attack not just his rivals for the presidency, but also certain of the players. That doesn't look too good for Bartomeu, and that's a theme that I think we should all be following over the next few months.
Yeah, I mean, the flip side is, in his case, it's probably better that it happened now because he does have some months for this to for the storm to calm, let's say, and for him to be able to work things out. Because I think there was a big question as to whether he would bring forward elections, which were supposed to be happening in the summer of 2021, but it looks as though he isn't going to do that, and that he is going to try and look for replacements for those 6, vacant seats basically on the board now. But it is interesting to see how the story develops, and what that will mean for Barca as well.
Yeah, it's the political machinations behind the scenes. As you say, he's got a perfect smokescreen at the moment. But if you're a Leo Messi and you're kind of reading this and presumably having more time than ever to kind of mull over it, you must be thinking, what do I have to do to get loyalty from these people?
Well, if anything, I don't know if you saw on Instagram, he did take to Instagram to say, fake news, not going to Inter Milan.
Yeah.
So at least, it does seem that he's quite happy to stay right here and stay put in Barcelona for the moment. He's got plenty of time to mull over those supposed transfer rumours.
Yeah, and long may that be the case, Semra, because one thing we haven't mentioned, both you and I, our years in Spain, broadcasting about football, how privileged we've been to coincide with Messi. I mentioned earlier that I commentated that Gamper friendly game, which was his first big game with Barcelona. It's been absolutely thrilling to be able to watch professionally the greatest player, I think, who's ever played the game. And such a shame that he has to be concerned with off-the-field nonsense like that.
Well, hopefully we'll see him, back on the pitch sometime soon and continuing to wow us all with his extraordinary talents. But Simon, I think, don't want to take up much more of your time. I think we can leave it there unless you have any other parting thoughts or comments you would like to share.
No, my tomato juice is running out.
And my tea is also all dry. So I'll have to go put on another pot of tea. But anyway, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
A pleasure, Semra.
With you.
As always, a pleasure talking to you. Looking forward to seeing you in the flesh as soon as we get through this nightmare.
Likewise, believe me as well. So enjoy your Easter Sunday. Take care.
Thank you.
And as well to all of you, thank you very much. Once again, enjoy your Easter if you celebrate the holiday. We'll see you all very soon. With more episodes of Tea Time Talks coming up this week. In the meantime, take care, stay safe, everyone. Adios.
Viva La Liga.
Viva La Liga, baby!